In the depths of the night, the whispers of magic awaken dormant powers. Welcome to a world forgotten, where a young woman named Rochelle is about to unravel the mystery of her father's disappearance. 1. Friends to enemies, what did you do? Jackson demanded. He had to shout to be heard over the wind that whipped around his face. We squinted at each other, partly out of anger and partly to keep the wind from blowing my long hair into our eyes. We may not be close anymore, but I knew that look. It was his "how could you be so stupid" look. I didn't relish being on the receiving end, but we had bigger problems. My life was sad, so I wished for a better one, I admitted, also yelling. It was past the time of being embarrassed over what was. You should have come to me instead, Rochelle. You, of all people, should know how dangerous magic is. He raised his hand to shield his eyes against the flying debris. It didn't help. He didn't have to add "for you." We both knew what he implied. Magic was dangerous for me. Because we are so close. And you're such a good guy all of a sudden. And you'd drop everything to help just because I asked, I retorted. Let me never be delusioned about who he was ever again. I glanced at the cyclone around us, hell-bent on destroying the school. Not the time or place for this conversation. His eyes bored into mine with something I didn't recognize. He had changed a lot since we last stood this close. But that didn't change the fact that he was right. Magic was dangerous and I should have known better. Now it might be too late. Plus I should back up. Normal people don't accidentally start natural disasters with their feelings. Which was not to suggest I was normal, just that the people with that sort of power usually had more control over it. Jackson brought out the worst in me. Let's start over. Since the magical revolution, there were those with and those without. Some people had magic and used it for good or ill as they saw fit. They took over the world, making it better for others like them and worse for everyone else. Anyone without magic was considered less than. And then there were people like me. We existed to cause chaos, my mother used to say. There was no predicting if a child would be a magical nullifier. Even the richest and most powerful mags couldn't figure out what caused a person to be born with this weird ability to soak up the magic in the world and twist it until it was unrecognizable. Most of us nulls ended up in orphanages, only to be adopted by scientists, who wanted to study us, or corporations, who wanted to use us. In 70 years, they still hadn't figured out what made us tick. My parents worked hard to keep me hidden, to keep our family away from magic. Some things are inescapable. Besides, I was done hiding. At 12, I finally convinced them to let me go to public school. At 14, my dad disappeared. When I was 16, I convinced Mom to teach me magic, secretly, of course. I can hide it, I'd pleaded. If I can learn more about magic, maybe I can figure out how to control it. And find my dad. Now, a year later, I was no closer to controlling this awful gift than I was to finding my dad. I wonder if he'd be disappointed in me. But Jackson really messed up my plans. It was my first day, and instead of being totally anonymous, a null in disguise, in my new school, exactly one person recognized me. My first class was history and Jackson made his presence known. Mrs. Diana started her lesson at the beginning, with the world's first known record of real magic. Not Vegas acts, but real magic. The first was documented in France. A young boy levitated out of his stroller, giggling at his mother's distress, as he floated away up to the top of the cafe roof. The next documented cases happened all over, seemingly at random. One student asked if there was a pattern. There was not. Then he piped up. How long was it before we knew about void mags? I cringed at the slur for nulls. The last time I'd heard that voice would been children. 8 years old and conspiring how to run away together so our parents couldn't separate us. Where we would go, what we would do to survive. Jackson had enough power for both of us, he'd said. Of course, his voice was deeper now, almost a decade later. Several heads turned back toward the voice in surprise, mine included. At the back of the classroom, with his feet on the empty chair in front of him, sat a vaguely familiar boy I never thought I'd see again. My heart lurched excitedly in recognition. And his eyes were trained on me. He smirked unkindly. Not like the boy in my memory at all. The slur should have been my first clue, his smirk my second. The smile that had started on my face died immediately at the malice I could see in those cold blue eyes. I remembered those eyes very differently. The students sitting around Jackson snickered openly. Two girls, one on either side of his desk and both beautiful beyond words, challenged the room with their eyes. You would recognize these as the popular kids. You can't call them that anymore, came a small voice from the front of the class. The speaker, a small girl in the second row, shot a look at the popular kids in the back of the room. I didn't know her name, but I knew I liked her already. Before the situation could get out of hand, Mrs. Diana cleared her throat. The term we use is nulls, Jackson, and we'll be spending the latter half of the semester talking about those without magic. Back to the lesson. Jackson put his feet on the floor and leaned forward in his chair. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. Nulls, he said sneering, don't just not have magic. They ruin magic. They take it from other people and pollute it. Nulls should all be locked up so they can't hurt the rest of us. Students murmured around me. Some agreed with Jackson's statements while others were politely aghast at his stance. I was cold with anger far beyond seeing red, and well into cold-blooded hatred. This was the kind of thinking that got people like me killed. I couldn't believe the words were coming from my old friend. Well, I guess we weren't friends anymore. Our poor teacher rapped her knuckles on the desk and started on a new lesson, this one about the importance of tolerance. I turned around in my seat and tried to pay attention. But the feeling that I was being watched never went away. Plus, after class, I lingered so I could catch the girl who'd stood up for me without even knowing it. I couldn't tell her why her words meant so much to me without revealing myself to be a null, but I could still thank her for protecting those who weren't there to protect themselves. And to avoid seeing Jackson on the way out of class. He must have known what I would do. He shooed his friends off to their next class and hung back, claiming he needed to talk to Mrs. Diana about a grade. As soon as his friends were out of earshot, he casually came up behind me. You don't belong here. He didn't say it loud enough for anybody left in the room to hear, but he said it with plenty of vitriol. I couldn't see him, and I refused to turn around, but I could tell just from the presence behind me that he'd grown. It was difficult to reconcile the sweet boy with the cruel person behind me. Don't let the looks fool you. Behind his thick sandy hair and broad shoulders lies a monster. Even when he was insulting me, it was hard to not see him for the Adonis he'd grown into. Beautiful outside, ugly and hateful inside. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered back with as much bitterness as I could muster. People get hurt around you. I remember what you did to my sister. You should leave. He all but spit. Before I tell everybody what you are. He brushed by me, making it clear that he wasn't above violence unless I did as I was told, and then he was gone. 2. Not afraid of the big bad wolf, I stared after him, unable to move. If he told anyone about me, it was over. Nulls didn't get to study magic. Ever. Most schools, public, private, or magic, considered us a danger to the general student population. They weren't wrong. Fortunately for the schools, we usually didn't survive long enough to have the opportunity to attend. Don't let him get to you. The same small voice who defended nulls against Jackson sounded from my left. I turned to look at my new favorite person, my quiet defender. Her curly blonde hair was pulled back from her face to show off her cheekbones. Her narrow face might give the impression of hardness behind her smile, but her eyes gave her away. Kindness lived in her, abundant and inexhaustible. The majority of the class had already left for their next class. Had anyone heard what Jackson had said to me? Mrs. Diana wasn't paying anyone any attention, and there weren't many people close to us, but I couldn't be sure about this girl. He's hot but a major jerk. His friends run the school, but they all answer to Jackson. His family is powerful, and they think that makes them better than the rest of us. It hadn't always been like that. Things must have changed after his sister died. Did he think I had something to do with that? I'm Emily Newsome. We don't get a lot of transfers, so if nobody has offered to show you around, consider me your guide. She held out a hand. Old-fashioned, but I liked it. I shook it, smiling. Rochelle Blakely. A fake name. Nice to meet you. I wondered if this would be the only friend I'd have time to make before Jackson ran me out of school. If you can point me to. I looked at my schedule for the next class. Wherever ethics of the arcane is, you'll be my new best friend. Not in small part, because my old best friend hated me now. That's where I'm headed. We probably have the same schedule. Most of us do, which means you haven't seen the last of Jackson丨for the day. As Emily turned to go, she threw a smile over her shoulder and added, "Stick with me, kid. I got your back." I wanted to tell her that she put her faith in the wrong person. That there was a reason for Jackson's nastiness. That she shouldn't be so trusting. But without more knowledge about magic, I would have no chance to find my dad, and this whole sham would be pointless. We walked to the next class, Emily giving me facts about the building or maybe the teacher. I tuned her out. I told myself that if Jackson outed me, I would run. He hadn't been the only one to change in the last 9 years. I had a few tricks. But until he did, I was going to learn everything I could. Starting in the evocation class after lunch. Plus, the ethics of the arcane class was followed by rune law and then herbology. Though none of them were my main focus, I took copious notes. I'd already read the second-hand textbooks the school gave me as a transfer student. If I had to leave the books behind in a hurry, at least I would have my notes. I followed Emily to lunch. Beatrice Potts' Magiscola Preparatory Academy served lunch buffet style. A salad bar stood well lit near the entrance to the cafeteria, and the hot lunch stand, dessert cart, and sandwich station were all crowded at the back of the space. The food was included in the price of tuition, even for us scholarship students. Magiscola Prep had an entire department dedicated to senior students who wanted to focus on the culinary arts. "Sit with us?" Emily asked. "My friends and I have a prime table away from the masses. Popular kids rarely stray from their cluster at the center of the caf, so it's pretty safe over there." I'd been scanning the cafeteria for Jackson, but she might have assumed that I was looking for a table. We took our trays to the far side of the room, where a table of 4 chatted happily. 2 boys and 2 girls around our age looked up at our approach. Emily introduced them as Scarlett, Orville, Joseph, and Maria. They smiled and waved and welcomed me to their table. I placed my tray next to Orville, across from Emily, and straddled the bench seat, facing the group while they picked up their conversation. I swear, if she were even a little bit less hot, Commenda would be a worthless class this year. "She's not going to teach us anything," Joseph said. I had no idea who or what they were talking about. I didn't have a comedy class on my schedule. Maria disagreed. "Did you see those heels? The woman wouldn't have the job if she weren't qualified, and if she can fight magic with magic and still look that good, I want to learn everything she has to teach us." Emily leaned over to whisper to me, "These guys are all 1 year ahead of us. They start the day with Commenda, combat and defense, while we end with it. Short for combat and defense, not comedy. Still hot." Joseph shrugged, taking a bite of his sandwich. Orville just smiled at the exchange and continued to shovel pasta in his mouth. I smiled at my own pasta despite my growing anxiety. What I wouldn't give to belong in this group for real. Too bad I couldn't keep Jackson from noticing that I hadn't run screaming from his threat. His words stuck with me. I know what you did. I hadn't done anything. Could I get him alone and convince him that I didn't have anything to do with his sister's death? So, Ro, what's your story? Maria looked at me from Emily's other side. It had been a long time since anybody called me anything but Rochelle. She opened a bag of chips and popped one in her mouth, watching me expectantly. These kids were all so normal. I hadn't expected that. Transfer student from out of state. Just enough magic to qualify for a magischola. No siblings, no dad. I shrugged, painfully aware that my aloof attitude wasn't the way to make friends. Not much else to tell. The best lies were rooted in the truth. She pissed off Jackson in history class today. Mrs. Diana had barely even started talking before the jackass was mouthing off about nulls, and after class, he got all up in Rochelle's face. What did he say to you, anyway? I thought of a quick lie. I was in his way. I guess he's not used to people moving out of his path before he has to ask nicely. Joseph chuckled. Sounds like Jackson, the world's biggest jackass. He thinks he owns this place. His dad can buy his way into this school, but he can't buy the more in a brain. Joseph stopped to think, chewing another bite, before adding, too bad he's hot, too. What a waste. Scarlett smacked him on the arm playfully. Careful there, big guy, the moron might hear you. They laughed. Then we'd be in big trouble, Orville said, rolling his eyes. Yes, this is what I wanted. Comfortable friendships and people who loved me for me. Outside of my parents, I had no relationships. Not since Jackson moved away. Speak of the devil. Emily nudged my foot under the table. I looked up at her only to see that she wasn't looking at me at all. Her gaze was fixed on something behind me. I turned, regretting it immediately. Jackson's face was set in a fierce line as he made his way through the cafeteria to our table. So much for being safe from the popular kids. I let my shoulders relax even though I was anything but calm on the inside. In a show of courage I didn't feel, I took a bite of my lunch and ignored his approach. No one at the table spoke, in fact, a few surrounding tables stopped talking to watch. I understood why. Jackson was all muscle beneath his black t-shirt. You knew it from the way the fabric hugged his torso. He wore dark jeans and boots, and the whole ensemble screamed bad boy. The sour expression completed the vibe. It said, I'm not somebody you want to mess with. He stopped next to me, and the cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. I had one leg under the table and one on the opposite side of the bench, and it took everything I had not to turn so that both legs faced away from him. I thought I told you to leave. Jackson's voice was low, but in the quiet caf, the sound carried. In the time since I'd known him, Jackson had become a bully. Just like his father. And this version of him was the reason people like me lived in fear. I chose not to respond. As much as I wanted to give the visage of relaxation, my legs were primed to run pending his next words. You should have left when you had the chance. I'm not afraid of you. I looked up into his eyes to drive the point home. It was a lie, of course. But I'd gotten very good at lying. Jackson smirked. We'll see about that. 3. In my defense. The whole room watched Jackson continue to the side door to the caf, as if stopping at our table had been more coincidence and less coordinated threat. Gradually, the student body started whispering again. My heart jumped up into my throat, finally realizing that we should have been, in fact, very afraid. Who is that girl? I heard over the din. What did she do to him? Someone else asked. I wish I knew the answer. Scarlett was the first at the table to regain the power of speech. That guy really hates you. Thank you for the reminder. He hates newness, and Ro is new, so ipso facto, Jackson was bound to hate Ro. Joseph put his hand on my knee comfortingly. Don't worry about him, he's powerful and pretty, but there's not a creative bone in his body. He'll forget about you by the end of the week and move on to torturing some other poor soul. No psychological torture for you. His pout made me laugh despite Jackson's threats. Except I knew that Jackson was probably on his way to the headmaster's office to tell him a null had snuck her way onto campus. As far as the administration was concerned, impersonating a mage was a criminal offense. It was the perfect excuse to arrest me, make an example out of me, and send me to a lab for rehabilitation. Wouldn't be the first time a null disappeared under the guise of reformation. Or the last. I didn't join the rest of the lunch conversation except to smile and nod or laugh where appropriate. I could feel Emily's eyes on me every once in a while. Hopefully, she only saw what I wanted her to see, cool, calm, and collected Rochelle. Absolutely killing it on her first day. Jackson was not an evocations class, though his group of popular kids was. Their hatred of me ran deep, even without their ringleader, they made ugly faces at me from across the room. What had he told them? He wasn't in divination and arithmancy, either. But nobody had come to arrest me by the time I packed up my notes from class, so I followed Emily to combat and defense. Since I transferred into the program late, all the other students had already been paired off. Emily went off with her partner, Archie, and I was left with Ms. Williams, the hot new teacher for Commenda. I agreed with both Joseph and Maria's assessments. Ms. Williams was a bombshell, and she looked badass in her leather boots. I didn't know how practical the 4-inch heels were, but what did I know? She cleared her throat, cutting through the excited tension in the arena. My fellow students, separated into 2 lines facing each other, were ready for this lesson, whatever it was. Today's lesson will continue our self-defense series. As this is the only place on campus where magic is allowed, and therefore you have access to your power here, I am obligated to remind you of the ground rules. Number 1, non-lethal offense only. A few of my brave peers chuckled softly at that. People shuffled where they stood, ready to be let loose. Honestly, those people were far more dangerous with power than I was as a null. Number 2, if your partner requests a reprieve, you give it no questions asked. And number 3, the things you learn in this class are designed to protect you, not teach you to kill each other. Ms. Williams smiled down the rows of students. To my left, defense. To my right, offense. Have fun. The underground arena at Beatrice Potts Magischola was legend among the magic schools. It was the only one that lifted the magic dampening spell that kept students from using their power while on school grounds. Being underground, the arena was an unfinished space carved right out of the earth. Plenty of access to the elements, plenty of space for practice combat, and far enough away from the rest of the students that it was unlikely a rampant spell would take out the school. The dampening spell was the real reason I was able to convince Mom to agree to the plan. I don't know what she had to do to get me in, but as far as Magischolas went, Beatrice Potts won in every category. An elemental threw a fireball at his partner as soon as Ms. Williams finished her speech. That partner countered with a wall of dirt that grew straight out of the ground before her. She punched the wall and a rock flew directly back at her partner, who dodged. Another student transformed into a rhino and charged his partner, who turned invisible. I spotted Emily, statue still. Only the satisfaction on her face when her opponent screamed and tried dusting something the rest of us couldn't see off of him did I realize what she was. An illusionist. Elementals had been partnered with beasts, telepaths had been partnered with psionics. I had never seen so many different kinds of magic all in one place. The air felt supercharged with energy. I knew instinctively that my anti-magic nullness was soaking in the excess power in the room. Whatever it was that made me a null was always searching for more. We had been starving it for years, we stayed away from mags, and Mom kept her magic clamped down with her iron will around me. Now it reached out with invisible hands and mouths and gobbled up all of the magic it could. I felt whole for the first time in years. Giddy didn't begin to describe the rush, as the magic flowed into me, filling me up. Maybe Magiscola wasn't such a good idea. Ms. Williams turned to me. Now, what can you do? Your file says you're a minor scale elemental. Elements were easy, being on a minor scale meant I had little power naturally. The Magiscola wouldn't be expected to perform at the same level as a major scale student. Correct, I said, because that's what my file said, not because she was right about what I was. It's difficult to block a psychic attack with an element, so I'm going to count down from 5, and you try to distract me before I get in your head, okay? Ms. Williams blew her red curls out of her eyes and stepped back, putting several feet between us. Her heels clicked on the rocky floor. I wondered how she didn't fall over the uneven ground when I heard her say, 2, 1. I threw up my arms against her attack, which did nothing to stop her from poking me with her mind. At least that's what it felt like, a spectral finger poking me in the brain. She wasn't searching for anything, and she didn't put visions in my head to frighten me. Just a small poke, an oddly familiar sensation. Unless that move was to put up a mental shield, your arms won't block a psychic attack. She smiled warmly at me. Why didn't Joseph like her? Let's try again. Just pick your favorite element and distract me from my attack. Ms. Williams started her countdown again. Okay, Ro, you got this. Something simple. Just make a little wind, blow her hair over her face to block her line of sight. Or set her boots on fire. 4. No, not the boots. Do something else. 3. What would a minor elemental do? 2. I tapped into the magic that I had greedily stored inside me, just asking for a little bit. Even though I could keep the magic within, I knew better than to use it. But when the situation called for it. 1. I closed my eyes. Magic rooted me to the rocky ground under my sneakers and rippled out towards Ms. Williams. Opening my eyes to slits, I watched the ground surge like bubbles under my feet, getting faster until they reached Ms. Williams's boots. The quake knocked her to her knees. The sounds of the other students practicing stopped, but the earthquake wasn't done yet. It continued to roll outwards, the momentum dying as it traveled further away from me. No one else fell. Stunned faces looked in our direction, none more stunned than Ms. Williams. Nervous heat swelled in my chest as I realized what I'd just done. There was too much magic in that attack. I imagined a seal on the magic I held inside me, praying it would lock away the power and stop me from soaking in more. Students went back to their own sparring. Ms. Williams stood to brush herself off. That's not what I would classify as minor. She didn't look at me when she said it. Stay after class so we can talk about your classification, please. Turns out I didn't need Jackson to give me away. I did a fine job of blowing my cover all by myself. 4. Family reunion that which doesn't kill you, can really mess up your plans. Magic was known to overwhelm nulls. It was part of what made us so dangerous. We could, at any moment, soak up so much magic that it would explode outwards with unknown consequences. Ticking magic bombs. That's what nulls are. My mom taught me a trick to keep my nullness in check. Imagine that you are a bottle, and when you are full of magic, imagine that there's a stopper on the bottle. This keeps the magic from overflowing and makes sure that you can't consume more of it. She had once been a powerful psionic, specializing in healing. She and Dad used to tour the country, going to Magischola's to give lectures. That stopped when I was born. Her background and training meant I had an advantage over most nulls. I had a teacher. So when Ms. Williams asked me to stay after class, I knew I had two options. I could release the energy I trapped within me until I was empty and hope it would be enough to fool her into thinking that the earthquake was a fluke. Or I could run. I guess I could also confess. Maybe she would take pity on me and help me find what I needed to locate my dad. So make that 3 options. No, 4 options. I could kill her. Scratch that. I didn't want to kill anybody, that's why I needed to learn everything I could. Okay, only 3 options then. Most students had already forgotten the interruption to their commender class. Ms. Williams asked me to hang back while she supervised other students. The air in the room had lost its supercharged energy, but nobody seemed to notice now that they were back to sparring. I found a spot by the arena entrance and leaned against the wall. If I let go of all the power I'd soaked up, I would have nothing to use to protect myself. If I ran, all of this would have been for nothing. Then again, if I convinced Ms. Williams to help me, I'd have an ally against Jackson. Where was he, by the way? With my back against the wall, I watched Emily. In here, she didn't seem so small. Her attacks were unblockable. Poor Archie never stood a chance. Learning anything, Ro? There he was. Popping up when I least expected him. My name in his mouth no longer sounded as friendly as it used to. It sounded like an insult. I'm having a great time, thanks for asking. I did not turn toward his voice, telling him with my body language that I was completely relaxed even though I was anything but. It's too bad we didn't have these classes as kids, you know. Jackson walked into the arena just enough to stand beside me, his arms crossed. Now that we were older, he was the taller one. I missed towering over him on the playground. We need to learn to protect ourselves. I couldn't agree more. But I wasn't about to tell him that. I turned so I could look him in the eye. Don't you think it's more important that we protect each other? I asked with a smile. Never let them see you sweat. Jackson grinned down at me. There were too many teeth in that smile to be a kind expression. Mags protect mags. Humans protect humans. But who will protect the nulls? He asked, keeping his tone innocent despite the threat in his words. I will. The words came out of my mouth before I realized it. I'll protect nulls and mags and humans from the likes of you. I don't know what possessed me to say that. Possibly the power I held tamped down inside of me, searching for any way out. It made me feel strong. But it also made me stupid. Rage flashed in his eyes, darkening the icy blue for a second before it passed so quickly I might have missed it. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Then who is going to protect the world from you?" I couldn't move under his gaze. The Lenores were a powerful telekinetics family. Jackson held me in place with just his eyes, as he stood back and grinned again. He tilted his head to one side and raised an eyebrow at me. Still not afraid of me? Unable to answer, I imagined the stopper coming out of my bottle that contained the magic I held instead. Ready? Jackson moved around me to join the class. The moment he broke eye contact, I let the magic run through me, breaking his spell. You'll have to do better than that, I told him. He faced me again, too slow to hide the surprise on his face. I wasn't supposed to be able to speak while under his spell, let alone move. It took Jackson only a moment to recover. I remember why I liked you. Once upon a time, I liked him too. You know what? I take it back, he said. You stay as long as you like. Just know that I'll be here to stop you when you can't stop yourself. When, not if. The threat had left his voice, leaving behind only the truth of what he said and the promise that he would be ready to destroy me. Someone called Jackson's name. He held my gaze a little longer, tossed me another snarky smile, and left me to join the class. "You're late, Lenore," Ms. Williams called out as he approached. Her voice echoed in the chamber now that most of the students had stopped their own attacks to watch Jackson enter. More than a few pairs of curious eyes drifted between Jackson and me. "I lost track of time," he offered in explanation. I could hear Jackson's smile in his voice, the threatening tone he'd used with me a distant memory. I hated that his smile, a smile I couldn't even see, warmed a piece of me. How could I still miss him after the way he acted today? The class had originally spread out across the arena, but now the students were closing in, preparing for a show. "Don't expect me to go easy on you," Ms. Williams warned him. Students surrounded the two of them now, leaving 50 feet of empty space between them. Nobody was paying me any attention, but I slunk further into the room anyway to join the crowd. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Jackson bounced back. And then he attacked. As a telekinetic, Jackson's power was his ability to move objects with his mind. Usually, a telekinetic specialized in either living or non-living items. The Lenores were able to manipulate both, but that wasn't the most noteworthy of their talents. Jackson came from a long line of telekinetics, who could also manipulate the cells in the human body. They called themselves Vedants, or Vedakinetics. He raised one of his hands, and rocks dislodged from the floor to fly at Ms. Williams. His other hand remained a fist, but I knew that stance. This was bigger magic, less flashy than the flying rocks but deadlier. Ms. Williams laughed as Jackson's rocks crashed into an invisible wall before they had a chance to make contact. She made no moves at all to indicate her next attack. The only indication that she'd done anything was Jackson's shoes grazing the ground as he was lifted in the air, his legs and arms stiff, fingers splayed uncomfortably. And yet he too was enjoying this demonstration. A breeze came out of nowhere to ruffle his hair. I couldn't tell who made that happen. Magic swirled around the arena, and I hammered the stopper into my bottle. The last thing I needed was more magic. Jackson winked at Ms. Williams just before she fell to her knees. She struggled against his hold, but he did not allow her to stand. It didn't look like it hurt. She seemed more annoyed than anything else. Her smile slipped. This was not how she wanted to end her class. "Yield?" he asked, confident. "Not quite," she said through gritted teeth. She made a flicking motion with one hand and Jackson was thrown backward into the crowd. I gasped along with several of the students around me. Letting the magic bubble up inside me, I pushed 3 students out of Jackson's path. They didn't deserve to be casualties in this fight. Jackson pushed himself off the floor and stood, brushing the dust from his clothes. He smiled graciously and bowed to Ms. Williams, now also standing, and it was over. Students clapped politely, but this didn't seem to be an odd occurrence to anybody except me. "Tell your father I let you win," Ms. Williams said to Jackson, pulling him into a hug. "He wouldn't believe me if I did, Aunt Cha," he replied, hugging her back. "I should have realized it sooner." Charlotte Williams, Mrs. Lenore's sister. Jackson's aunt. I knew I recognized that trick with the spectral poke from somewhere. Jackson and his sister would practice on me back when we thought I was just human. 5. To classify, or not to classify. A tone sounded in the arena and throughout the school signaling the end of class. Students gathered their belongings from shelves near the entrance and filed out for the day. I'd tucked my bag behind several others, just in case anyone decided to go snooping in the new kids' stuff. "Stick around, Rochelle, please," Ms. Williams spotted me near the door. "So much for sneaking out with the rest of the class. Jackson, hang tight. I have something for you to give your mom while they are in town." Charlotte Williams was not about to accept my sob story about my father. She was probably more inclined to sell me to the nearest laboratory herself rather than wait for the authorities to turn me over. Nulls were not as common these days. Some labs offered finder's fees. Since I couldn't run to save my cover, and I was not about to confess, I propped myself up against an outcropping of rocks and tried to look innocent. While I waited for the arena to clear, I uncorked the bottle in my mind that held all of the magic and siphoned it all into the rocks at my back. Where my hands touched the uneven stone surface, the rock warmed uncomfortably. I willed the excess energy away from me and into something else so that I couldn't inadvertently suck it back out of the air. I kept only a small amount. The test had to measure something. Nulls read like humans on any scanner, but humans weren't allowed to attend Magischolas. Let's go up to my office, you two. My eyes popped open. I didn't know when I'd closed them, or how long I stood there in a meditative state. The arena was empty save for the three of us. I followed behind Ms. Williams and Jackson, listening to their easy, familial banter. Each step felt like I was going in the wrong direction. We took the stairs up one floor and walked straight into the commended teacher's office. Ms. Williams's domain was stark, almost sterile. White walls, no pictures or awards, 2 wooden chairs in front of the wide table serving as her desk, a single cabinet in one corner behind the desk. I would have thought a woman who wore heeled leather boots to teach a bunch of teenagers how to fight and defend themselves with magic would have a more interesting office. Or a picture of a motorcycle or something. Jackson, let me get that box for your mom. Ms. Williams went to the corner cabinet and unlocked it, removed a small green box, and locked the doors again. The little box was the most colorful thing in the room. When she set it on the desk, I could smell chocolate across the room. The seniors whipped up something special for her birthday. I convinced Mr. Taylor to let them use real amaretto instead of the virgin stuff this time. Ms. Williams proudly opened the box to show 6 chocolate-dipped strawberries with tiny pink pearls sprinkled over the tops. The box will keep them cool until she can get them in the fridge. Just make sure she gets these tonight, and tell her I'm sorry I can't be there for her birthday, okay? Ms. Williams' smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She replaced the lid and handed the box across the desk to Jackson. She'll be disappointed you can't make it, Aunt Cha. But strawberries are a good substitute. Jackson accepted the box. I felt like an outsider witnessing an exchange that I had no business being part of. And I desperately wanted out. I stayed by the door for a quick exit if the opportunity presented itself. You're going to make us all proud tonight, Jackson. Before Jackson could respond, and before I had a chance to ask what was happening tonight, which would remind them that I was in the room, someone knocked on the doorframe. Williams, I need you to take a look at something right quick, if you're not busy. A teacher I didn't recognize poked his head in through the open office door. Ms. Williams smiled at him, all dismay over not seeing her sister tonight vanished. Sure thing, Tony. She looked from Tony to me to Jackson. You guys stay here a sec, okay? Jackson, keep Rochelle company until I get back. And then she was gone down the hall. I waited until their muffled voices disappeared down the hall. You don't have to stay here, I told Jackson, thinking I was offering him a kindness. He didn't want to be there any more than I wanted him around. Actually, I do. The last thing I want is for you to be alone with another of my family members. He crossed his arms. Every time I saw him, the changes in him awed me. Not just the attitude though, there was plenty of shock in that change. He grew into the big blue eyes I remembered. His hair was no longer an unruly mop he could hide behind. I took in the view of him, committed it to memory, and shut down the betrayal I had been battling all day. We weren't children anymore. He no longer loved me like he once did. As much as that broke my heart, I had to let him go. He certainly didn't have trouble letting go of me. What is your problem, Jax? I regretted the nickname the instant it left my mouth. I regretted it more than the way my words sounded like a whine. Pitiful. Jackson rolled his eyes. Don't play stupid, Ro, he sneered. I'm not stupid, you're a hazard to everyone around you. His voice was dangerously low. If there had been laughter in his eyes before, it was gone. People who get close get hurt. I didn't have anything to do with Cammy, I started, but he cut me off. Like I'm going to believe that, Jackson scoffed. He shifted his weight angrily, preparing for something. A fight? Did he think I was going to attack him? I wish you would believe me. But you believing me when I say I would never hurt her doesn't change the fact that I didn't hurt her. His next words were a growl, I know what I saw. This conversation was going in circles. If you think I'm so dangerous, why don't you report me already? I notice that I am conveniently not arrested. I knew better than to challenge him, and yet. It'll be more fun to watch you try to convince everyone that you're something you're not, Jackson said with a shrug. Some of the tension left his body. The muscles in his arms relaxed slightly, which told me three things. Jackson had not grown out of his inevitable need to protect his family. He thought I was more of a threat to him than to the rest of the students. And maybe he could be swayed to my side. I opened my mouth to ask what changed his mind when the voices rounded the hallway. Jackson cut me off before I even spoke. My aunt doesn't know about you. Keep it that way. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I shut my mouth out of self-preservation, not because Jackson told me to. Ms. Williams laughed at something Tony said. He squeezed her hand before quickly dropping it, thinking I wouldn't see the gesture from my spot just inside the door. I wondered if the reason that Ms. Williams was going to miss her sister tonight had anything to do with Tony. Thanks for letting me borrow your teacher, kids, Tony said with a wave. He left as quickly as he'd come. Jackson, you're off the hook. Get out of here, you have a fundraiser to get ready for. Ms. Williams stopped in her tracks, looked at me, then at Jackson. Actually, this is great. The fundraiser is for scholarships for students just like Rochelle. You should take her with you tonight. We both jumped to turn down that opportunity. That's not necessary, I don't think that's a good idea. Nonsense, Ms. Williams waved a hand at both of us in dismissal. It's a great idea. Let's get this reclassification out of the way so you two can go get ready. I had plans to spend the evening in the library copying as many books as I could. The Magiscola wasn't going to teach me what I needed to know about dematerialization. The library was my only hope to find clues about what happened to my dad. Ms. Williams reached for a small device on her desk, a magic scanner, created to measure the amount of magic in a person's blood. I knew the lab that produced that model, it was top tier. Good thing I hadn't left all my borrowed magic on the rock. I glanced at Jackson, who looked more worried than I felt. Strange to see him concerned for me. And then I remembered his warning, he wasn't concerned that I would be discovered but that Ms. Williams would be the one to discover me. She held the scanner to me expectantly. I produced my palm, and she placed the device in the center of my hand. The little black box warmed comfortably against my skin, and the tiny display told Ms. Williams exactly what I wanted her to know. It read, Class Minor, 30%. Jackson let out a small, relieved breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. Interesting. 30% isn't bad, but I would have assumed you'd at least read major at 60%. Shrugging, Ms. Williams removed the device from my palm and placed it back on her desk. Now that we have that cleared up, you're free to go to the fundraiser. I've never been shooed out of a room so quickly in my life. Ms. Williams shouted to us as we walked silently down the hallway, have fun you too. We did not speak as we traveled down the hallway. One flight more of stairs took us to the main level, which would lead to the classrooms, the cafeteria, the library, and the dormitories. Safely and completely, out of his aunt's earshot, Jackson finally broke the silence. I'm not taking you anywhere. Just stay out of sight tonight so that Aunt Cha doesn't see you. Actually, make sure nobody at all sees you. I snorted, bold of him to assume I was going to follow him around like a puppy. Those days were over. See you around, Prince Charming. Have fun at the ball. I headed for the library. 6. A lesson in library manners. What is it that makes a library so comforting? The smell of old books, the contented quiet that lingers between shelves, the endless knowledge on the pages. I added another heavy leather-bound book to my pile. While I was pretty sure my father had not intentionally teleported in the permanent sense, I didn't know what I didn't know. Certainly not enough to rule out even the silliest of explanations. So the book about teleportation went on the pile, along with a history of invisibility, a spellcrafter's guide to dematerialization, instructions on reducing the size of an object, and a complete theory of time travel and the effects it might have on persons living and dead. That last one was a stretch, too. Stooping to gather my first round of books, whispers a few rows down from me alerted me to the presence of at least 2 people hiding out in the library. He got super weird about her when I asked. A female voice said tearfully. She's just a noob. What could she possibly have that I don't? A second female voice comforted the first. She's got nothing on you, Miley. Besides, he would be lucky to have you if you chose to let him, not the other way around. Don't base your worth on whether or not a guy likes you. I slowly picked up my stack, trying not to make noise and startle the 2 girls. It made me feel creepy, eavesdropping on them from a few aisles down. All the lessons on manners and history, and how to craft a believable lie, and not one about what to do when you find yourself accidentally privy to a private conversation you want nothing to do it. No matter how hot he is, said a third voice, joining the hushed conversation. Jackson Lenore doesn't have to be your endgame. You're 17, not 90. Besides, all the best guys are older anyway. Bath? Check please, I have anywhere else to be. Shut up, Claire, this is not about you and your college boyfriend. Claire, shut up. Someone sniffed, probably Miley. I stopped trying to be stealthy. But shuffling my feet and sighing wasn't enough to drown out the sound of Miley's misery. I just like him so much. His parents are in town, and he didn't even want me to meet them. I had a plan. My mom always told me that if you can make his parents love you, he'll never leave. What if he took her instead? I let the stack of heavy books land on the nearest empty table. They were all empty at this hour, which worked better for making my presence known to the trio a few aisles over. Thanks, gravity. The conversation turned to harried whispers. I sat gratefully and opened the book on top of the pile. Teleportation. Might as well rule it out as an option now. The rune on the cover was incomplete, as all written runes were incomplete to avoid casting undesired magic. The author didn't want a reader to be randomly teleported somewhere with no way to return. What if they landed in the middle of a bank robbery? Or in the ocean? What if they couldn't swim? I digress. The table of contents listed topics such as considerations for a successful teleport, what to expect when teleporting yourself or others, and the list of known families with this ability in their repertoire. Not exactly a how-to book, but the information could prove pertinent to locating my dad. Maybe not a loss after all. I turned to the section on what to expect. 3 girls emerged several aisles removed from where I'd found the teleportation book. I watched them in my peripheral as they approached my table. You'd never know one of them had been distressed. The tallest of the trio, a beautiful brunette in light wash jeans and an oversized burnt umber sweater, huffed as they approached. Her companions, both in shades of maroon like a flag of their friendship, trailed half a step behind. I recognized this group as friends of Jackson. They sat together in class this morning. The ringleader eyed me suspiciously. "Oh, it's you," the brunette sneered, though her voice was quiet. "What are you doing here?" I did not meet her gaze, too intent on taking notes about teleportation. "Libraries are great for many things," I responded casually, finishing my note. When I finally looked up at her, I held my tongue against the rest of my snarky reply. Her eyes were red and puffy, and I didn't want to make things worse. "I'm just here catching up on what I might have missed during the first half of the semester." Not a lie. One of the girls rifled through my stack of books. "We haven't covered, like, any of this stuff." She picked up the book on time travel theory and wrinkled her nose. "What are you, a nerd?" She said it like there was something wrong with being a nerd. Rude. At my last school, we only had nerds. Granted, I was homeschooled by my mom, and I was the only student. But this girl was still rude. If I had to guess, I'd say she was Claire. The girl trying to look like she hadn't been crying must be Miley, part of the Jackson fan club. But I didn't know the third girl. Better to be a nerd than a loser crying in the library. Instead of rocking the boat and garnering attention I couldn't afford, I shrugged at her and reached for the book. Claire handed it over with a sour look on her face. I tried not to relish her distaste. Miley huffed. She crossed her arms over her chest in an effort to look bored or tired of the conversation, but her shoulders hunched a little too far to hide her insecurity. "What does he even see in you?" I didn't have an answer for her. She didn't give me the chance to give her one before she added, "I know you heard us over there. I am not going to let you ruin my junior year. Just stay away from him." Who? Easier to play dumb than to try and interpret what exactly she was talking about. Jackson. Miley's voice carried through the empty rows of books. She quieted to continue. "He told me to stay away from you, disappeared for most of the day, and then hung out after Commander with you. Don't get any ideas that he likes you or anything." I would never. The guy thought I had something to do with his sister's death. But I wasn't going to admit that to Miley. "Jackson and I want nothing to do with each other," I told her honestly. The boy I'd met today was nothing like the boy in my memory. He made it clear that he didn't like me and I decided the feeling was mutual. Miley was welcome to him. "I hope you guys work it out." Miley's arms dropped to her sides, every muscle tight with frustration, and she stomped her foot. The sound echoed. I fought the urge to shush her. "Just stay away from him," she repeated. I planned to. I added Miley and her friends to the list of people I wanted to avoid for my time here. Lucky for me it didn't seem like they frequented the library, and I was going to sleep here if I had to until I found what I needed. "I'll do my best," I promised, again honestly. It might have come out with a touch too much sarcasm though. Miley and her friends stormed off none too quietly. The sound of their angry footsteps down the stairs to the first level was lost in the plush carpet of the main floor of the library, but I waited until the door sneaked shut behind them before continuing my research. Blessed quiet. I returned to my book. Plus, it turns out the Beatrice Potts Magischola staff doesn't let you sleep in the library. I learned this when a janitor prodded me awake, fearful that I'd died slumped over school property, and told me to come back in the morning. Darkness filtered in through the second-floor windows. The librarian and her staff had already left, so there was no one to help me check out the books I hadn't gotten to yet. It felt good to cross things off of my list of possible explanations for my father's disappearance, but I didn't feel like I'd made any real progress. Invisibility had been crossed off almost as soon as I opened the book. Unless an invisible person or persons had touched my father and then whisked him away, that wasn't it. I also decided that he hadn't been shrunk down to the size of an ant. What I'd witnessed was an instantaneous disappearance, nothing gradual or shrinky about it. I ruled out time travel. If someone killed him earlier in his timeline, I would cease to exist. Right? My list had quickly devolved into notes and questions I'd later crossed off. Teleportation had a series of angry question marks next to it. Before nodding off, I remembered picking up a book on psionics, who had the power to rearrange the atoms in a person's body. It sounded a lot like what Jackson's family could do. I didn't want to consider it, but had to wonder if his whole family felt they needed revenge on mine. And then came the janitor. Go home, kid. Come back in the morning for more reading. Bring coffee, maybe this stuff won't put you to sleep. He made a point of sticking around the library until I left. There were only so many trash cans to empty, and he went around to each of them at least twice. I replaced the books I'd been hoarding, making notes on each one I wanted to return to, and left. They would be there tomorrow. The library was at the front of the school, while the dorms were at the back. This way, all the prestige was easy to showcase, while the dorms for us loud, unruly students could be hidden away from visitors and donors. I cut through the quad in the middle of the building on my way to the dorm. The fastest way from point A to point B is a straight line. Plus, it was the way I'd come earlier, and I wasn't yet familiar with the layout of the school. The brick walkway muffled the sound of my shoes as I walked, but there was no one around to hear it anyway. The natural magic in the bushes, the trees, the blades of grass, sang to me. I stopped a moment to listen, but kept myself sealed off from it. The song reached for me, begging me to drink down the magic and make it mine. It was a bad idea. I dug my fingernails into my palm and forced myself to leave. Natural magic always sang to me, but here, in a place full of innate magic and rife with magical people, I had to be extra careful. Nulls can be greedy. It's the nature of our magic or non-magic, depending on who you ask. As soon as the outer door to the dorms closed behind me, the magic song cut off. I sighed gratefully. The tension that gathered in my shoulders without my knowledge dissipated just as suddenly. Happily, sleepily, I made my way to my first-floor room. It was the last single. I was lucky they didn't have any openings in a double. As an only child, I didn't have to share a room with anybody, and I wasn't keen on starting now. The happy, sleepy feeling stopped when I saw that my door had been propped open. I crept up to it slowly, cautiously. There was no sound from inside the room. Pushing the door all the way open, I reached for the light switch just inside the doorframe. Light flooded the space. The room was empty, but someone had clearly been here. My clothes were scattered all over the floor, my makeup dumped across the bed. Books had been tossed and discarded. Shoes thrown in piles. My heart jumped into my throat. What were they looking for? As Rochelle's magical journey unfolds, each secret revealed could change her destiny. Don't miss a moment of her growth. Subscribe to our channel, and join her in embracing the unknown challenges.